Welcome to this explainer on a truly pivotal moment in cinema history. We are looking at the year 1931. This was the precise moment Hollywood traded its traditional white-hatted heroes for the charismatic, violent, and deeply human figures of the criminal underworld. The early years of the 1930s saw the American dream curdle into something far darker. Throughout this explainer, we will examine how this specific cultural environment facilitated a complete shift in narrative focus. It brought the mobster to the forefront as a fascinating anti-hero, and as we will see, this fundamental shift still dictates the entertainment we consume today.
Moving to the breadline era of 1930s America. The Great Depression had aggressively stripped away the facade of 1920s prosperity. What remained was a hungry, deeply cynical nation, profoundly tired of old moral fables. Imagine grainy, high-contrast scenes of crowded streets and endless soup lines. That was the daily reality for millions. The public simply no longer wanted to see a hero who followed the rules of a society that had clearly failed them. Instead, they wanted to see a man who broke those rules and won.
The timeline here is rapid and unforgiving. In 1929, the market crash devastated the economy. By 1930, the breadline era was firmly established, and in direct response by 1931, the cinematic anti-hero was officially born on the silver screen. This rapid chronological progression highlights the immense urgency of the public's demand. It was a direct cinematic reaction to a systemic collapse. Hollywood recognized that audiences required a completely new type of protagonist to reflect their own profound disillusionment.
Enter the gangster, bringing an entirely new cinematic structure. The year 1931 brought us Little Caesar and The Public Enemy. These two films completely redefined the design of the screen hero forever. We are looking at the foundational texts of the mobster genre. They did not simply introduce new characters, they introduced a fundamentally different way of interacting with the world on screen, effectively giving birth to what we now call the Year of the Gangster.
Consider Edward G. Robinson's portrayal of Rico, short, pugnacious, and driven by a terrifying singular ambition. Rico was not a monster born out of a void. He was a man who viewed the world strictly as a game of power, and he absolutely refused to be a pawn. He offered the audience a character they could fear, but importantly, one they could deeply understand. Rico was a man who refused to be small in a world that consistently demanded he be nothing, rising through the ranks with expensive suits, cigars, and flashy jewelry.
Is this the end of Rico? When Robinson famously delivered this line, huddled under a billboard and looking so small and defeated in the rain, it resonated profoundly. The crucial point here is that this iconic dialogue functions as far more than just acknowledging a physical defeat. Rico is questioning the profound collapse of the personal empire he constructed with his own two hands. It represents the ultimate tragedy of a man who tried to forcefully build his own version of the American dream, only to watch it entirely crumble. Now let us contrast these two monumental figures, the brain versus the nerve. We have the calculated, brain-driven power of Edward G. Robinson on one side and the vibrating, dangerous charisma of James Cagney on the other. While their methods and on-screen energies differed wildly, what is truly fascinating is that their appeal stemmed from exactly the same societal disillusionment. They were two different responses to exactly the same broken system, each capturing the imagination of an audience desperate for agency.
Cagney as the Nerve introduced a new era of casual violence. In The Public Enemy, Cagney's Tom Powers didn't just walk onto the screen. He vibrated with an aggressive, restless energy. He was the kid from the slums who hit back. Cagney became the first actor to demonstrate that screen violence could be casual and even domestic. He didn't apologize for his character's brutality, and he carried a dangerous, street-smart charisma that made it practically impossible to look away. The infamous grapefruit incident brilliantly illustrates this brutal reality, marking the death of chivalry. When Cagney shoved half a grapefruit directly into his girlfriend's face, it wasn't a carefully choreographed, stylized stunt. It was a visceral, shocking moment that proved to silence stunned audiences that the old rules of chivalry were permanently dead. This single domestic act crystallized the death of polite society in the cinematic language of the 1930s. These figures ultimately functioned as mirrors of society, turning the mobster into an accidental folk hero. They lived fast, dressed exceptionally well, and simply took what they wanted. They were reflections of urban warfare and systemic failure. In an era where headlines about prohibition and the Great Depression proved that the banks and the law were failing the common man, they hit back at a system that had left the ordinary citizen entirely behind. This fundamentally established the modern anti-hero, a protagonist entirely lacking traditional moral virtues, yet admired for taking control in a world that feels increasingly dead and systemically broken. We watched Rico and Tom Powers because they were vibrantly, undeniably alive against a backdrop of institutional failure. They asserted their own will in an environment that tried to strip all willpower away. The reason this remains vital today is that this very dynamic continues to drive the deeply flawed protagonists we champion in contemporary storytelling.
Of course, the censors demanded a moral reckoning. They demanded death in the final reel. Tom Powers is famously delivered to his mother's door like a horrifying package. Yet, despite these mandated violent ends, the cultural template was permanently forged. This established a character structure that would last for decades. They paved the way for every Tony Soprano and Michael Corleone that would follow. Ultimately, 1931 proved our enduring fascination with those who refuse to play by the rules, permanently altering the stories we tell ourselves.
This was brought to you by Stalls or Circle. Thank you for listening.